No, but there is a way of making it like, I'm really bad at this.
Oh, that's smaller. So maybe if there's an opposite direction.
This is to make it like straight.
Oh, okay.
So we can make it straight there.
Yeah, that's good.
And then we can flip it.
Okay, that's good.
Right? I think that's the best.
Starting beginner space.
Or I think we can actually move this whole thing back. Ajá, eso sí se puede hacer.
Oh, wow.
Okay, I see. Yeah, we can move the table out of your way.
Yeah, that'll do.
Okay, wait, and then.
Okay.
Okay.
And then it doesn't matter where the laptop is, right? No. Well, I have to not be.
No, being here is something that's translation. Sí, yo creo que sí, voy a usar también para ayudar a la traducción. Yo leo esto por ahí, ¿sí?
Sí, ¿verdad? En la biblioteca o no sé dónde, pero yo tengo como 4 años. Y yo he escuchado mucho de usted también. Selene, ¿verdad? Selene.
¿Sabes qué trabajas vos?
Yo soy traductor, de hecho. Soy traductor de textos españoles. Y hago voluntariado en la biblioteca de San Elena, la biblioteca pública de comunidad.
Sí, lo que he visto en otro lugar también. Pero una cuestión social no era.
Sí, tal vez.
Sí, pero sí, ok, bueno, chicos.
Sí, igualmente, porque siempre escucho su nombre y ahora ya puedo, porque ya no la había visto, pero no sabía que era usted.
Vale, yo espero que no hayan sido cosas malas. Y son malas pues.
Como se trabaja aquí, pero no.
¿Vos entraste en la expo de Marín?
Ese Chris fue el que...
Súper, pero llegaste.
Sí, yo estuve.
Entonces, ¿qué te pasa? Yo estuve en la red.
Sí, estuvo muy chido.
No, yo estoy emocionada. Yo realmente no sé. O sea, no hay muy bien, pero.
Vamos a esperarse como 2 minutos más, ¿está bien? Sí.
¿Cómo funciona esto? Las líneas.
Do you want water?
Sure.
Like warm water?
Either, whatever's easiest. Thank you. Just for emergencies.
Yeah, I think we can start.
Would it be better if I was on
Yeah, no, I think, yeah, whatever. I mean, the slides will not show on the live stream.
No.
Yeah, you can move the upward and River also, I need you to speak like really loud,
Okay.
so I can hear you over my voice.
Okay. Yeah, I guess I'm sleeping. Okay. Okay. Hi everyone, my name is River. Thank you for coming. Let me know if I'm not speaking loud enough or slow enough, and I can try to speak more loudly and slower. Hopefully this is okay for everyone in English with a Spanish translation. And if it's not, just raise your hand and we'll see how it goes because this can be fairly interactive. I'm going to talk for a while and then we'll have questions that you have. And I will do my best to answer anything. So we're going to be talking about living in a non-binary world, what's that's like, how to be.
Just a second.
Mhm.
No, that's
Yeah,
The device is not working.
Yeah, it wouldn't be a presentation without technological difficulties. That's just how it goes.
Did you introduce yourself before the?
No, not yet. I will, I promise. I'm going to give some information, and if it's not enough, you can ask me more information. And I will. Yeah, no, you're perfectly on time.
Okay, we're fine.
Okay, great. Okay, so we're going to be talking about life, but before we get started, the first question is, who am I and why am I here to talk to you right now? So first of all, mucho gusto, mi nombre es River. I want to tell you a little bit about myself to give you some context for this talk. I recently published this book, which is in English for now. It might be in Spanish in the future, but it goes through what we're going to be talking about today in more depth and other topics as well. I've been told it's really important that I tell you my age. So I'm 34 years old. I know I look a lot younger. I am from the United States. I'm from New York City. I went to a top 10 university and then went to a top 10 business school. And I tell you all stereotype about, and I'm non-binary and I'm trans. And there is a stereotype of trans people that they are 19 years old and they are not professional and they are not successful. But in reality, they come in all ages, all shapes, all sizes, success. So we can break that. This is what we're going to be talking about. Just a general overview. What is non-binary? Everyone's favorite question, is it a trend? Is it a fad? Why is everyone being non-binary all of a sudden? The difference between gender, what somebody looks like, their pronouns, their sexual orientation, and their sex. This is confusing for almost everyone, so it's really good to get into it. Why to use correct pronouns? Why is it a big deal? Why should we care? Why does it matter? How to be an ally, and how someone knows that they're non-binary, and then plenty of time for questions. And I also want to say just at the beginning that just by being here today, this isn't a talk that everyone would go to, so I can already tell that you are a person who is open-minded and interested in learning, and I think that that is something to be applauded, because when we learn something new, we are bound to make mistakes because it's an adjustment and everything takes time to get used to, and it just means that it's a learning process. So thank you for being here and thank you for learning. And in this talk, there is no judgment, there's no shame, so you are welcome to ask any questions that you have, and I'm going to do my best to answer them. So what is non-binary? Before we answer that question, we have to ask what is binary. We are taught from a very young age that we live in this very rigid world of absolutes. There's no in-between, there's no room for anything different than what is already in a certain mold. So you are old or you are young. It is black or it is white, and you are a man or you are a woman. Or not. Is that really true? Are there old people who are old souls, and all the ages in between? Black and white is missing a lot of colors, isn't it? It's missing gray, it's missing red, it's missing all of the colors of the rainbow. Then just man and woman, for some people. So when a baby is born, a doctor looks at the baby and looks at the body parts that this baby has and says, it's a boy, or it's a girl. And for most people, that is true, and that stays true for their entire life. And these people that were told that they are one gender, and that stays true for them their entire life, they are within the binary, and these people are called cisgender. This is most people. This is 99% of people. So what we are talking about is it does not fall into this. However, just because it's a minority doesn't mean that these people don't exist. There's a second group of people that when they're born, the doctor says it's a girl. And this girl grows up and maybe as young as 3 years old or as old as 70 says, I don't know why everyone's telling me I'm a girl because I'm actually a boy and I've always been a boy. Or the doctor says it's a boy and this boy says, no, I'm a girl, I'm a woman. And these people are also within the binary and they are transgender. So they are transgender but still within the binary of men and women. And then there's a third group of people that are also told it's a boy, it's a girl, and they grow up and none of the labels that they're given quite make sense. If they're not exactly a boy, they're not exactly a girl, maybe they're somewhere in between, maybe they're neither of those. And these people are called non-binary because they're not fitting within the binary of this rigid two structures. And sometimes they're trans and sometimes they're not. And we'll get into that a bit later as well. So is non-binary a trend? Why is this happening in the year 2022? We've never, ever seen this before. Or have we? Non-binary people have always existed, and we see that throughout time and throughout culture. So here is just an example, or a sample, of non-binary people that have always existed in indigenous in India. We have the Mushis in Mexico. We have a third gender in Thailand and the Philippines. We have two-spirit people in Native American cultures, including the Lakota tribe. And what they show us is that there have not always been only two genders, and in these particular examples, this idea of a third gender, fourth gender, or more, for example, in Judaism, which is a religion of around 6,000 years, they recognize anywhere between 6 to 8 genders. And most people don't know that, but the rabbis talk about it, going back in history, that there is recognized many genders. And what these people are, especially in these indigenous tribes, they are the healers, they are the teachers, they are the mediators, they are the marriage counselors, because they have transcended, if you think of the word trans, because they have been able to go from one place to another. They have a different perspective on life than people who have always been the same gender have. So they were very valued and revered in these cultures. It was never considered wrong until Europeans came over and brought their religion, their beliefs, their colonization, and in order to get control of these cultures, they decided that anything other than man or woman was going to be criminalized as evil, and that is why today we don't usually recognize it and think that it's something wrong. But it's not because it's wrong, it's because it is what colonizers and people looking to gain control decided was wrong just to gain power. So there's a similar analogy that we can look at for why all of a sudden non-binary is becoming popular. This has always existed, and that is actually the history of left-handedness. So people who write with their left hand. Before the mid-1900s, there was a very low visibility of people who wrote with their left hands. It was very, very stigmatized, and it was considered the work of the devil, and evil, and lazy, and incompetent. So when you went to school and you wrote with your left hand, the teacher would slap your wrist, and you would start writing accounts, and you wouldn't tell anyone that you were left-handed. However, in the mid-1900s, that stigma decreased, and what you see is that all of a sudden, there are all these left-handed people out of nowhere, seemingly out of nowhere, everyone is left-handed. How could that be? But if it was a trend, and if it was a fad of people being left-handed, we would see one of two things. The first is that the chart would continue to increase exponentially after the mid-1900s. More and more people would be left-handed. Or, if it was a temporary fad, what we would see is that after the initial spike, it would go back down, and we would go back to a normal level of left-handedness. But what actually happened was it plateaued, and it didn't grow anymore. So what we can see from this is that it wasn't that more people were left-handed, it was that the stigma decreased so they were finally able to be open that they were left-handed. There weren't any more left-handed people in the later parts of the 1900s than there were in the early parts of the 1900s. They were just comfortable feeling open about it. And that's what's happening today. It's not that there's any more non-binary people today than there were 50, 100 years ago. They just have the language, the visibility, and the decreased stigma, although there's still plenty, in order to say, yes, this is who I am, and I'm going to be open about it. So now let's look at the difference between all these different structures that people confuse and conflate with gender, so that we can keep everything very, very separate and specific, because specificity is important. This shows you how everything can be separate and overlapping. So what is gender identity? Gender identity is, I am cis, I'm cisgender. I'm transgender. I'm non-binary. I'm a more specific label, like agender, which is part of the non-binary label. But that actually doesn't have anything to do with my appearance. So whether I dress in a feminine way, or in a masculine way, or in an androgynous way, or in a totally eccentric way that you can't label, that actually doesn't have to do with my identity. And we can see these examples all the time. So if you look at celebrities, if you look at female basketball players or soccer players, football players that, shave their head, wear suits, and feel very, very strongly cisgender women, they're never not going to be a woman regardless of how they dress. And we see it with, musicians and rock stars, men who wear eyeliner, men who wear skirts. If they say that they're men, they don't stop being men just because they're wearing a dress or a skirt. So these are actually separate. And what that means is that just because a non-binary person, for example, wears a dress, that doesn't mean that that person is really a woman and they're lying. They're still non-binary. It's just that the appearance isn't necessarily correlated to who they truly are. Pronouns, from what I know, have a few options. In Spanish, you have él, ella, and and while you would assume that all non-binary people would prefer to go by AA pronouns, this is not always true. It's always best to ask the person. I know cisgender people who really like being called they pronouns, so AA pronouns. even though they're cisgender. And I know non-binary people who really like going by she, ella pronouns, or he, él pronouns. So just because you prefer a certain pronoun, that doesn't mean that it is necessarily who you are. It's always best to ask. And then there's something that so many people confuse, which is sexual orientation, which is very, very separate. So who you are attracted to. Are you heterosexual? Are you asexual? Pansexual? Any other orientation? That could be any gender. I mean, you can be a cisgender woman and be heterosexual, or pansexual, and you could be non-binary and be any of those as well. So those are not the same. There was a very funny form I saw online that said, are you a man, a woman, bisexual, or non-binary? And it's like, okay, what do I pick? You know, one of these things is not the same as the other. And then there's sex. So this usually refers to the body parts that a person has. And in English, we would say this person is male or female. I think in Spanish, we just say hombre or mujer. And there's also intersex people, which is not the same as non-binary. Intersex means that you have body parts that typically are attributed to a man and a woman. And intersex people often strongly identify as either a man or a woman, not necessarily non-binary. So they can be non-binary, but there's also plenty of intersex people who are not non-binary. And that is an important distinction to make. Now we come to the topic of trans. So a lot of non-binary people consider themselves trans, I do, and a lot don't. The definition of transgender that I like to use is that your gender is not necessarily or exactly the way that the doctor described it when you first were born. And so if you say it like that, your gender doesn't exactly match what's on your birth certificate, then non-binary people absolutely fall under the overarching trans umbrella, which is, it says there's plenty of room under the trans umbrella because you have transgender, and then you have binary trans, which is you are a trans man or you are a trans woman. So a trans man is someone who was born and the doctor says it's a girl, but that person is actually a boy. That's a trans man. And then you have a trans woman who, when you're born, the doctor says it's a boy, but that you're actually a girl, and that's a trans woman. So that's binary trans. And then outside of the binary, you have all of these different labels, which could be gender queer, gender fluid, demi-boy and demi-girl, so you kind of identify a little bit with a boy, but not completely, and others as well. That's all part of the overarching non-binary umbrella. So there's why use corrective pronouns? What's the big deal? First, because you're all here, I know that you are all good people who want to respect other people. And it doesn't feel good to be misunderstood. It doesn't feel good when someone tells you who you are and you think, you know what, that's just not true. We have a word in English called misgendering, and I couldn't find a direct translation in Spanish. It might just be misgendering. But it is when somebody, and it's incorrect, and it feels really bad. And that person might not tell you that it feels bad. They might smile and say nothing at all, but it does harm, and it does impact a person. And when it happens all day, every day, it really takes a toll and adds up over time. Sorry, 1 minute. So just to get a glimpse of what that could look like, so you have this person over here. I'm making an assumption that this person is a man, might not be, I might be, it's okay, don't worry about it, we're good, I'm fine. And when you're already feeling bad because somebody misgendered you, it doesn't feel good when somebody also asks you to take care of them. So instead of going on and saying, oh, I'm so sorry, I know I said sorry earlier, but I just want to say sorry again. Can I just say sorry some more? Just say sorry once. Just, you know, if you call someone L instead of AA, just say, oh, lo siento, AA. Just apologize and correct yourself. And if they correct you, just say thank you. Thanks for letting me know. Thanks for letting me know that you honor me enough to tell me when I disrespected you, because not everyone has the relationship where they can be honest like that. And then commit to do better next time, because it is totally fine to make mistakes. It's not fine to not try. So if you are making mistakes all day, every day, that means that you're not practicing. And you can practice. Anything new is a skill that we learn, and it just takes a little bit of time and it takes a little practice. So when you make a mistake, just make a mental note to yourself that you're going to try to not make that mistake next time. And then just continue on with your day. Continue on with the conversation. It's not a big deal. It happens. Using the correct pronouns saves lives. So there was a study from the Trevor Project, which is an LGBT organization that helps young people in the United States. And this study showed that while 42% of people who are LGBT seriously considered attempting suicide in the last year, and this is an older study from 2019, that actually increased to over 50% when it came to transgender and non-binary people. So that is really heartbreaking that so many young people feel that there is no hope left in life. However, this number actually decreases in half when they have people in their lives who are constantly using the correct pronouns for them and using the names that they've asked to be called. And this also decreases when they are able to use their pronouns on official documents, and it also decreases when they are able to have spaces in communities where people are using their correct pronouns and using their correct names. So this shows how important it is and literally life-saving if you do some work. This might just be one person in your life, but you are one of so many every single day that could be disrespecting this person. And one thing that I want to make very clear is that being trans is not a mental illness. So it's not, okay, well, you know, this group of people is considering suicide, there must be something really wrong with them. That's not what's happening here. What's happening is that when anyone goes through life being constantly disrespected, discriminated against, hearing in the news all the people who think that they shouldn't exist, that takes a toll on someone, and it makes it difficult to cope, especially if you're young. But all people deserve respect. So I put in here, being kind is free. It is a bit of effort, but it is 100% worth it. So how to be an ally? First, use the correct pronouns, and this does require practice. So if you are uncomfortable using AA pronouns, you can practice. You can practice talking out loud at your kitchen table by yourself, talking about a friend you have or someone that you know, and just practice really forming those words. And then you can be proactive and use your pronouns wherever you think a trans or non-binary person would use theirs. So for example, if you have a name tag at work, if you are on Zoom, you can just add your pronouns. And when you hear other people who are misgendering someone, you can correct them. So for example, if there's a musician who's been very clear, who's been very clear that they use AA pronouns, and this person says, oh, I hate her music, you can say, okay, you don't have to like their music, but they've been very clear which pronouns they use. And then when somebody is not with you, still use their correct pronouns, because if you're going back to using, sorry, I'm recovering. If you're going back to using pronouns that don't fit when they're not around, that's not being an ally, and it's not being a friend. It's the same as bad-mouthing your friend or saying something not nice about your friends when they're not there. When you hear conversations that are negative or discriminatory about trans and non-binary people, interrupt them, speak up, be outspoken. And if you think that that person is not interested in listening to what you have to say, then just end the conversation, redirect it, change it to something else, because at least other people aren't continuing to hear anything negative that they're saying. Share everything that you're learning with other people in your lives. So for example, being in this room or being on the live stream, you know that most other people you know are not listening to these conversations and they're not learning. So share it with them. Share it as if your best friend is trans or non-binary, or your child, because that is the kind of fight that we need, because there are not that many trans and non-binary people in the world. There is a lot of misinformation out there, and we all need all the support that we can get. And then finally, if you know someone in person, ask them how they would like to be supported. So for example, some people would really like aggressive advocacy. So if you hear someone misgendering them, say, no, this person goes by AA. And for some people, they would prefer to speak up for themselves. So just ask them what they need and how you can be supportive for them. And then for AA pronouns in Spanish, you just add an A, where you usually add a or O. And if there's a hey, you just add a U in front of it. So AA es mi amiga mexicana, AA es una estudiante latina. And then when you're writing in bulk, you can use the symbol or the X as well. And you can practice introducing yourself with your pronouns. So mis pronombres son los suyos. How someone knows if they're non-binary. I saw this meme and I thought it was funny, so I'll just explain it. This is from the TV show The Good Place. So on the left side, you have Chidi saying, me coming out as trans as an adult. He says, we got all 4 clues that you left us. And on the right, it says my childhood. And it said, oh, that's great. I left you more than 1,200 clues. So it's like when you grow up, you look back in time and say, oh, I should have seen that. Yeah, that was not exactly what I was expecting. But you kind of get more and more clues over time. So some people, and I've talked to people who are 7 years old, who say, finally, quite right my whole life, and now I have the language to describe it. This is the way I've always been, and I'm so happy, and I feel happy for the first time in my life that I can finally explain what's always been true for me. I've talked to other people who feel cisgender at one point in time, and now they don't, and that's okay too. Some people came out as trans in a binary man, and 5 years later they came out as non-binary. And that happens. It doesn't mean that someone's lying.